Pop quiz. How many planets are in Factorio space age? If you answered the 5 or 6 I can see on my screen right now...
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
Let's install a mod called Enable All Planet Mods and see how many there really are. There, that's more like it. As of now, there are dozens of additional planets you can mod into Space Age, each with their own unique twists, and more are being created all the time. That said, many of these planets are still works in progress, and we can only fit a few in this video anyway. So instead of enabling all planets, today we'll be playing through 3 of the big ones: Rubia, Cerys, Maraxsis. The goal for now is simply to beat them, but eventually I'd like to build megabases where possible, so we'll just add these to the megabase save. Also, I wanted to jump right into them without having to, beat Space Age first. Thankfully, all 3 of these can be added to existing saves without too much fuss. One sec while I discover them. 2 down, we have discovered Rubia and Cerys. We can't do Maraxsis yet because it integrates with Rubia and makes that a prerequisite if you have both installed. Not much keeping us here on Novice, so why don't we head out and try our hand at Rubia? Wait, what's this? There's something critical that you forgot to read before leaving. Looking closer, it appears that landing safely requires being able to withstand a large amount of impact damage. But I've already researched a ton of health, so let's just ignore the warning and see what happens. We have arrived at Rubia. Let's see what's down here. We have arrived at Cerys. Let's see what's down here.
Whatever was here has been covered by centuries of ice buildup.
It's under here somewhere. We just have to bust our way down.
I found the satellite!
Fittingly for Fulgora's moon, this tiny map is absolutely littered. The magnetosphere prevents most cargo drops, at least until you build a hydrogen bomb and blow a hole in it, which is our end goal here. But in the meantime, it's kind enough to make an exception for construction bots. Thanks, magnetosphere. This thing next to us is a frozen wreck of a Fulgoran cryo plant, which has to be both thawed and then repaired before it can be used. Most everything here is frozen under a thick, jagged layer of methane ice, including the big building in the center of the map, which is apparently a Fulgoran nuclear reactor. In the process of removing an iron stick from this dome thing, it reveals itself to be a radiative heating tower. I haven't found any combustible fuels yet, but I have found these accumulator equivalents, plus some solar panels and efficiency modules, so we can at least get a bit of power going. There's a lot of these heating towers around. Looks like they cover most of the map, and I love the way Fulgora's shadow creeps over its surface. Unlike Fulgora, the scrap here is no ordinary scrap, it's nuclear scrap, with a whole different host of products it can be recycled into, like solid fuel for the heating towers. Mining it also unlocks the ability to make repair parts, as well as plutonium-239, which doesn't seem to be made in a centrifuge, so who knows how we get that. After sifting through some more nuclear waste using the power of my bare hands, I scrounge up enough solid fuel to stick into a radiative heating tower to see what happens. True to its name, it warms up an area around itself, but not for very long. The landscape doesn't fully thaw out until the tower hits 100 degrees, but it maxes out at 150 before quickly dipping again. That means if we want a heating tower to stay online, we'll at least need to make a chain of nuclear scrap miner to recycler to box to nearby heating tower, so it has a constant supply of solid fuel. And after hand-feeding the first bit of fuel, we have a self-sustaining production loop. Even the biggest bombs come from humble beginnings. Repair parts are just engines plus green circuits, and we'll need plenty to patch up the wrecks that are scattered around. Once we've repaired a local cryo plant, the tech tree first asks us to feed it a bunch of scrap, which unlocks half a dozen recipes to do with local fluids, including the ability to make blue circuits from nitric acid. Repairing a crusher with the help of some scavenged blue circuits reveals itself to be just a reskinned asteroid crusher. I guess at some point we'll need to start shooting down these planetary asteroids that are drifting over the surface. Then I make a quick offshore pump just to see what fluid this milted slush is, and guess what? It's just water. In slightly more interesting news, you can get light oil and methane gas by feeding methane ice to these cryoplants. But strangely, methane gas isn't used for anything, anywhere. It just exists to be vented, I guess, but the necessary flare stacks will require a moon-specific research. That in turn will require a moon-specific lab, which is trivial to make, and a moon-specific science pack, which is not. Let's start with nitric acid. Easy enough, just ammonia and water, but getting the ammonia will require some sulfuric acid. So after we get light oil from methane ice, and also shove the methane gas byproduct into a tank and forget about it, we can turn that into sulfuric acid the usual way, cracking into petroleum gas, adding water to get sulfur, and adding more water to get sulfuric acid. But we're kind of hitting the limits of what we can build next to a single heating tower, so eventually I give up and kickstart a neighboring tower. And of course, to keep that tower fueled automatically, we'll need to snake some of this solid fuel over there before we can finally place a sulfuric acid tank. But remember, we're trying to make nitric acid, not sulfuric acid, so we have to combine the latter with these new nitrogen-rich minerals using a recipe called mineral leaching to get some ammonia plus some iron ore. Side note, if you're going to play this mod yourself, learn from my mistakes and build a real solar field, and also use burner inserters to move solid fuel into heating towers, because this is what happens when you don't. The slush even destroys your offshore pumps when it freezes over. Also, remember the mod gives you efficiency modules. Use them. Anyway, we're stuck here for a little bit because that sulfuric acid to ammonia recipe can only be made in a cryoplant, so we need to repair another one, which means we're waiting on more repair parts. While we're waiting, I take the opportunity to smear some more solar panels around. Once we fix that and set the recipe, we have to figure out how to belt in nitrogen-rich minerals when the nearest patch is way over here. As on Aquilo, belts need heat to work here, so hand-feeding some heating towers will help us plot a viable path. We can at least use undergrounds to cross these slush patches, so we can weave a horrible spiderweb of solid fuel belts to the nearby towers. In case you were wondering, no, you can't pick these towers up and move them to more convenient locations, and the same goes for the cryoplants and crushers. Spaghetti is a feature on Cerys, not a bug. Then of course we have to belt the nitrogen-rich minerals back, which will require even more heating towers. That's a decent number of belts, and we're going to need more. They do come directly from recycling nuclear scrap, but we can also make some extra by smelting the iron ore that the sulfuric acid to ammonia process gives off. However, you might remember that the vanilla sulfuric acid recipe also takes iron plates as input. So what we actually want to do is smelt the iron ore from the ammonia plant and route it back into the sulfuric acid plant. The cycle is slightly net positive on iron, so it can sustain itself and even create a little surplus for us to draw from. And with that, we have finally arrived at the point of all of this, which in case you'd forgotten was combining ammonia with water to make nitric acid. The other thing we'll actually need to set up proper automation for is repair parts, both as a component of the science pack itself and to patch up the additional cryoplant the science has to be made in. That means bringing even more heating towers online so we can reach the next nearest plant, which turns out to be right in the middle of a slush lake. I consider giving up on this one and repairing a different one, but then a stream viewer kindly informed me that concrete can be used as landfill here, so I make a concrete bridge over to the plant. Also, this is when it finally occurs to me to slap efficiency modules in everything. Anyway, 100 repair parts later, and we can start making the native reverse-engineered science pack. The first thing we'll want to do is get flare stacks, since that methane tank has been filling up in the background this whole time. Each flare stack can only vent 15 units of fluid a second, so we'll need multiple to vent as much as we're making. Then we'll queue up a few more things, like the ability to repair that big reactor, and a new white science recipe made from iron, carbon, and methane ice. I guess the asteroids are where we'll get the carbon from. I am quite grateful to have construction bots down here, less for construction and more for deconstruction. Picking up all these ruins and methane ice crags would be awful to do manually. Okay, I think it's about time we set up a power grid that doesn't contribute to the growing spaghetti nightmare. I also think we should probably set up a nuclear scrap recycling system a bit more robust than a single recycler dumping into a box. This will work essentially like a basic Fulgora sushi loop recycling system. Scrap recyclers outputting onto the outside lane of a circular belt, and filtered inserters shoving anything we need into storage. Plus a couple more filtered inserters dropping onto some underground belts so we can route out a rudimentary bus. The undergrounds are spaced far enough apart that we could tile these loops for extra output, but, spoiler alert, I'll never end up doing that. And then of course the last thing in line is some extra recyclers taking in anything the filtered inserters didn't grab, crunching them into bits, and dumping those bits onto the inside lane of the loop for another pass. That looks good enough for a first draft. Let's place it right on top of this scrap patch on the northern end of the moon. All that's left is to seed these towers with solid fuel and then watch helplessly as the newly milted lake swallows half the build. In fairness to the mod, there are subtle terrain differences in the ice to indicate what's beneath, but I really should have started by thawing this all out. Anyway, a bit of concrete and some power later, and we have ourselves a recycling loop. And of course the first thing we'll do with it is snake its solid fuel output belt around to the nearby heating towers to keep the whole thing online and running. Soon after doing that, I notice the belt is quite clogged with uranium-238, and it's here that I learn uranium cannot be recycled until mixed oxide waste reprocessing is researched. I decide to deal with that using the time-honored tradition of shoving it all into a box and forgetting about it. Then we need to extract gears, iron plates, and green circuits so we can make inserters for, ordinary green science, which we need alongside the native science pack to research that waste reprocessing. So we'll set up a green science assembler right off the lab and queue that up. Okay, just so we don't accidentally blow up a new build again like we did with the sushi loop, let's fuel every single radiative heating tower on this moon and reveal as much of the underlying map as we can. I return to the sushi loop and find that some plutonium has spontaneously appeared in the uranium chest. No idea how that's happening yet, but let's add that to the inserter filter just in case it's transmogrifying on the belt. Anyway, after our heating expedition, the massive nuclear reactor at the center of the moon is finally revealed. Let's see. First we need to excavate it, which is just removing 4,000 concrete, 100 at a time. Then we need to build a scaffold around it, for which we will need refined concrete. Easy enough. After that, it needs 400 each of blue circuits and repair parts. Blue circuits are no problem, there's that nitric acid recipe, but only the native cryoplant can use that recipe, which means we first need to repair yet another one of those. So while another 100 repair parts are crafting, I try to use the downtime to boost production of the iron inputs. The acid loop is where we're getting most of our spare iron from right now, so I boost light oil production to make more sulfuric acid and hopefully hurry that along. That only ends up saving a minute or so, but we do eventually get blue circuits up and running. Alright, it's past time to get serious about repair part production. We're getting every engine component directly or indirectly from the recycling loop, so we just belt those down and out of it, along with a little green circuit diversion to round out the repair part ingredients. Then just slap down a big line of engine assemblers plus a repair part assembler on the end. I doubt this is ratioed correctly, but I genuinely don't care. And for some reason I no longer remember, I decide to make a box chain to buffer this repair part output instead of just, belting them down to the reactor. Then I add a couple more voiding recyclers to the sushi loop, but that accidentally broke it because in the process I unknowingly cut power to a nearby heating tower's fuel input inserter and the whole thing froze over. Eventually I do replace those inserters with burner inserters. Anyway, we've now researched lubricant synthesis, which turns light oil directly into lubricant with the aid of lithium? Huh. And this isn't just a nice-to-have recipe. We need lubricant here to make electric engines for a rocket silo since we can't drop any from orbit. But that seems like a tall order because I don't see any lithium brine vents anywhere, and we can't drop lithium from orbit either. I spend a good 15 minutes trying to figure out how to generate lithium out of thin air, before finally a viewer suggested checking the map. And sure enough, in that view there's half a dozen brine vents sticking out like sore thumbs. Inconveniently, they're located smack in the middle of the eastern area that doesn't have any heating towers, and we can't build our own towers until after we beat the mod. So that naturally raises the question of how we're going to heat the pump jacks. Well, as it turns out, that giant reactor we just finished repairing is a fission reactor, so I guess we need to use that for heat. It can only be fueled with mixed oxide fuel cells, which take plutonium-239 to make. And we somehow have just enough of that in the uranium box for 6 fuel cells. I make one and throw it in as a test, and immediately start taking damage. I guess this isn't properly shielded. And there's another problem. The fuel cell depletes quite quickly, and we just don't have much plutonium to spare. So it's probably a good idea to plot out the lithium brine and heat pipe paths before using any more fuel cells, but that would require actually knowing exactly where these damn things are. I was once told by an optometrist that if they were going to order a pair of eyes from a catalog, they would order mine. Creepiness aside, I think that gives me license to say it's not my fault that it took me forever to notice these pale grayish-green lithium vents against the pale greenish-gray of the methane ice terrain. So here's the plan. Plot out the lithium field, pipe it all to a storage tank that's in range of a heating tower, put all the fuel cells into the reactor at once and run away for safety, and then let the tank fill up with all the lithium brine we'll ever need before the reactor sputters out and the pipelines freeze again. Then we just add ammonia to the brine and we have raw lithium. Now, if you happened to predict that the lubricant recipe could only be made inside one of the local cryo plants, you'd be correct. So we'll have to repair yet another one and pipe down some light oil. Once we do that, we can swipe a ton of spare engines to use in the electric variants thanks to that repair part automation we set up. I'd also like a handful of logistic bots, so we'll set up a little box-fed build for the robot frames. Frames need batteries, so we'll make a few of those right off the sulfuric acid tank. And while I could make the Logibots themselves in another assembler, we barely need any and they craft in no time, so let's just swipe the frames and handcraft a few. The next step requires white science, which means we need to shoot down some carbonic asteroids to make it with. Asteroids drift from top to bottom here, as per usual, so we'll scatter a few roboports around the north edge of the moon to maximize our chunk recovery area. We only need carbon from these, so we'll filter to only planetary carbonic asteroids and use uranium ammo to tag them. Hey, we're drowning in U-238. We might as well. Then we'll put those Logibots to good use making said ammo and distributing it to the turrets. Another requester chest for carbonic chunks into this crusher, and just like that, we have everything we need to make white science locally. That can only be made in, you guessed it, a Fulgoran cryo plant. But thanks again to the magic of logistic bots, we can just request the necessary repair parts and watch the plant magically repair itself. Methane ice will still belt in though. It's right next door. Side note, did you know you can set filters on storage chests by dragging an item in the chest and dropping it onto the filter? I didn't until a viewer told me. 5,000 hours in this game and I'm still learning new things. Anyway, extend the Roboport coverage to the lab and request white science, and we're researching the ability to make more of those accumulator equivalents. Plus these ghost-charged particle makers, whatever that means. That just about brings us to the hydrogen bomb we need to launch to get out of here. Naturally, that needs explosives, which on this moon can be made from nitric acid, ammonia, and solid fuel. Might as well set that up near where we already have those ingredients ready to go. Okay, those accumulators got researched just in time. We don't want any more power accidents like this one. Probably wouldn't hurt to spread a little more efficiency module love around either. Anyway, besides explosives, the bomb also requires plutonium-238 and 239. We have plenty of the latter, but the former only comes from the mixed oxide waste pipeline, which means we'll need to make more fuel cells and run this reactor a bit more just to get at its byproducts. If there's a way to shield this thing, I didn't discover it. And remember, this is with about a dozen health upgrades. It's bad enough that I have to get bots to keep the reactor topped off. I wonder why this research is taking so long before remembering that green science needs an inserter supply. Personally, I think this might have been better as blue science rather than green. You get loads of red circuits from the recycling loop, and you should be automating engines for repair parts anyway. Let's at least add a second native lab to hurry this along. While we wait for that, let's also make some tiny builds for low-density structures and rocket fuel. We only need enough to make a couple of rockets, one for a bomb and one for us. Okay, we've learned how to make a hydrogen bomb, and that finally gives us a tip explaining plutonium generation. If you're watching on a desktop monitor, you may have noticed some faint pink dots drifting around. Those are apparently charged particles, which spontaneously create plutonium whenever they happen to collide with uranium-238. Presumably, those charged particle generators we researched a while ago can increase the odds. But we have enough plutonium already, so we don't have to test that. Now all that's left to do is assemble the bomb, stick it in this rocket, and launch it. Shield your eyes, folks. And with that hole permanently ripped into Cerys' magnetosphere, we are finally cleared for takeoff. But just as an experiment, let's carry another hydrogen bomb off-world before bidding farewell ourselves. Hey, those legendary lasers and shields that I was making in the background for Rubia are finally done crafting. Nice timing. Alright, let's test this baby out. Yep, that is a sizable upgrade over the standard nuke. So, that was Cerys. Smashing Fulgora and Aquilo together made for what I thought was a fun little puzzle. The concepts of immovable buildings and radiative heat are interesting, and they do a good job of forcing you to build horrible spaghetti. I do wish the lithium vents were easier to actually see, and it's sort of a shame that you can't build a megabase here, but it does have some potential megabase tech farther down the tree. So who knows, maybe we'll come back here someday. Alright then, onwards to Rubia, the only Factorio mod as far as I know that boasts full butt plug integration. That's not a joke, it actually does integrate with remote butt plugs. And as you'll see, butts will be something of a theme on Rubia. Apparently, the legendary shields we gathered have now adequately prepared us for the landing. So, what's down here?
Odor at magnitude 8. Magnitude 12. Magnitude 31. We're breaking up. Turn on the anti-smell device.
Sporty.
Welcome to Rubia. This planet features destroyed infrastructure, contaminated water, an atmosphere utterly hostile to human life, and other right-wing accomplishments. Unlike Cerys, there's no magical exception for dropping construction bots. But also unlike Cerys, some of these wrecks have construction bots within, which somehow can operate normally in 300 km/h winds. Mining this wreck pops up a reference to the Ultracube mod. These little meta-humor asides will also be something of a theme. The gale force winds are both friend and foe here. On the one hand, you can get free always-on power from cheap wind turbines. But on the other, these airborne trashsteroids will constantly bombard your base. So you do need some defenses here, just from the weather instead of the wildlife. What wildlife there is consists entirely of scrap-digesting bacteria that we can extract from liquid sludge. This reddish bacteria spoils in about 45 seconds, but thankfully it doesn't spoil into anything. It just disappears. Now it's time to introduce Rubia's real twist. You cannot build left. Yes, despite the construction bots suggesting otherwise, your machines cannot work against the wind. Belts can go up, down, or right, but try to place one facing left and the wind will give a little whoosh and rotate it on your behalf. So there's no other real option here but to belt this ferric scrap up and the bacteria right to reach this biorecycler, where the bacteria can digest the scrap directly into yellow ammo and copper wire. We'll need a ton of that yellow ammo. I put 40 magazines worth into this turret just a few minutes ago, and it's out already. Turns out these trashderoids have high resistances and spawn constantly. And if you thought the belt restrictions were bad, inserters can't even face vertically. They have to move items rightwards. Period. No exceptions. As with Cerys, the goal for this video is just to beat the mod, but in a future video I'll be coming back and building a megabase here. So get subscribed if you're not already, because I think a right-facing megabase is going to be a fascinating challenge. We'll need a constant supply of ammo to defend the base, but since we get copper wire with that ammo, we don't want to get backed up on wire and cause an ammo bottleneck to destroy everything we've built. So we'll load any extra wire into this crapapult, which yeets anything loaded inside back out into the wind to void it. Yeeting anything is almost instantaneous, and after tossing out a bunch of extra ammunition, we hit the next milestone research. It would seem that using more of the same bacteria to metabolize yellow ammo will get us iron plates, so basically recycling with a catalyst. The first in a series of science packs we'll have to make and then yeet back out into the wind for research purposes is a makeshift science pack, which takes a wind turbine and a biorecycler as ingredients. And already the building limitations are asserting themselves. I want more inserter outputs from this 2x4 biorecycler, so we have to rotate the entire machine. Then we have to route the bacteria up and over the first recycler to reach the second, which will turn spare ammo into plates, and then shove the plates into a furnace for some steel. I walk away for less than a minute to scavenge some wrecks for more steel, which was a terrible idea because I'd been relying on my personal lasers to defend that little build. By the time I get back, I need to spend so many resources and repair packs fixing everything that it probably wasn't worth the effort to leave. Okay, we'll apparently need to yeet a lot of these science packs, which means we'll actually need to make a proper build for turbines and biorecyclers. That means we'll not only need to smelt plates to make steel, but also use more plates and wire to make gears and circuits. And you can already see how being forced to build this all rightwards results in some, let's say, unconventional design decisions. Turbines need both gears and iron plates, for example, so after feeding plates to the gear assembler, the vertical input belt then has to turn and follow the gear assembler horizontally, so both outputs can feed rightwards again into the turbine assembler. This whole thing could definitely be better, but cut me some slack, I've never had to build like this before. But as if to agree that this attempt needed a redo, the trashderoids decided to destroy the bacteria-making chemical plant. Guess that'll need its own separate defenses. Alright, let's take another crack at this. Because all our intermediate products need to feed right, the best way to make this tileable would be to belt in our basic inputs from the top and bottom, so we can stack tiles vertically. And it's probably also a good idea for each tile to take some of the intermediate yellow ammo and shove it directly into a turret for integrated defense. But before I can finish that thought, I have to break for another repair trip. These hand-fed turrets can't maintain a single stack of ammunition long enough to be reliable. But throwing 10 stacks into a box should do the job. Just so long as the inserter from box to turret faces right. Anyway, at first glance, this design seems like it'll tile well enough, so let's tear everything down and start over. I was going to feed these tiles with 2 lanes of ferric scrap, but as it turns out, the wind even rotates miners. Whatever, 1 lane will probably be enough anyway. Bacteria, however, we'll want as much of as possible, covering 2 separate belts, so we'll stack some chemical plants vertically to make the inserters line up properly. Looks like we have room for 3 tiles worth of this design. And after running power to everything, we have ourselves a combination copper wire and iron plate belt. But we'll also want some pure ammo production to keep our outpost turrets fed, so we'll top it off with 1 more biorecycler that puts ammo into a box and yeets the wire byproduct. Okay, from this combo belt, we then need to make steel, gears, and green circuits for biorecyclers. And I'll build in some output buffers for all of those to facilitate handcrafting some more building supplies. Looking back on things like this routing of biorecycler ingredients is kind of infuriating, because all I can see now are ways to make this belting better, or at least more compact. That said, a few tricks, like the iron plate belt hugging the gear assembler, I don't mind seeing repeated from the previous version. Yeah, I like this second attempt much better than the first one. But soon I notice that the iron and copper aren't being consumed proportionally to their respective production, so I add these circuit-controlled inserters to pull excess of either item off the end of the line and yeet them to keep the other item flowing. That finally appears to be enough for the base to sustain itself for a while. Why don't we kill some time while we're researching and scavenge for some more meta references? Here's one for Hide Boar. If you don't know who that is, I'm sorry, but I can't show you any examples of their artwork for fear of demonetizing this video. Here's a C-Block reference. Let me know if you want to see me tackle that once it officially hits 2.0. And here's a review for the planet Maraxsis. Too much water, apparently. I guess we'll see if they're right. Okay, this base is working, but it's still moving kinda slow, so let's double the whole thing. That starts with more turbines, more chem plants, and more belts. Then we just copy-paste the entire production area, and we've doubled our research speed. But while that reduces our downtime, it doesn't eliminate it. So let's find some more meta humor. Here's a jab at a developer's building skills, and here's a reference to how long Greel takes to craft in the Fun Mode mod, which I know all too well. Then I am interrupted by a warning for insufficient logistic storage space on Cerys, which appears to be in the process of dying. I set a chunk request just to shut the warning up, and then ignore the moonbase's imminent demise. Even if I could do anything about it from here, which I can't, I have bigger problems. See what happens when you let 1 turret run out of ammo for 1 minute? A short while later, and we've finished yeeting makeshift science, which unlocks ghetto science that we also have to yeet, along with new recycling recipes that we'll need to make its ingredients. One of those ingredients is locomotives, which is a particularly interesting choice, seeing as you can't even place normal locomotives on Rubia. You need to use the mod's special armored trains. Poo-choo trains. Anyway, locomotives will need steel and green circuits, so we'll make 2 combined belts of that from the iron and wire. Then I go to switch one of the bacteria belts over to blue bacteria. It's just a different sludge recipe on the chemical plants, only to discover that this bacteria crafts much slower than the reddish one, so we'll need many more chemical plants making it. We'll again need plenty of this science pack, so we'll again be making this design vertically tileable. The basic idea here is that cupric scrap plus red bacteria can be turned into engines and blue circuits, and the circuits can be added to blue bacteria to get red circuits and light oil. Rocket fuel and its component solid fuel can obviously be made from the light oil, and then that plus the red circuits and the aforementioned locomotives get combined to make the science. Circuits and trains are sort of awkwardly belted forward to match the length of the rocket fuel chain, and the build only gets more lopsided when I decide to double the rocket fuel production. Every individual decision in this build was perfectly rational, but Rubia has a way of making rational decisions look positively insane. Now, the nearest patch of cupric scrap isn't all that near, and the entire length of the belt back to base needs to be defended. So we are going to plot a path to the scrap using a series of box-fed turrets, and then run the scrap belt back well within their firing range. Once we have that, we can finally connect all the input ingredient belts to our science tiles and see if we actually set this up correctly. And the only obvious problem appears to be a lack of blue bacteria, which is easily remedied with a few more chemical plants making the stuff. About 10 minutes later, we've unlocked Craptonite, which are chunks that we can vacuum up from destroyed trashsteroids using Garbo grabbers. There was a recycling recipe we unlocked in the previous step that I didn't bother with because it produced red ammo and rails, neither of which we needed at the time. But now we've also unlocked an additional recipe that takes those rails and turns them into steel and concrete, plus an alternate electric engine recipe. Transatlantic metallico-asphyxiation, whatever that's supposed to mean. Regardless, we're clearly gearing up for rocket silo ingredients. We also have the option of yeeting 1,000 gun turrets to unlock longer-range sniper turrets, which are apparently less noisy. You probably aren't bothered by that, at least if I've leveled my audio correctly, but trust me when I say that all these turrets going off around you all the time gets very loud, so I am quite excited to get these. The Craptonite production path is a little involved. First, we need to add light oil to the chunks to make liquid froth, then froth plus concrete to make Craptonite frames plus some of the concrete that went in, then frames plus trains, turbines, and more light oil to make the final science along with some of the frames that went in. For the time being, we're still yeeting it, but this is the science we'll eventually need to ship off-world to discover Maraxsis. This is also a good opportunity to set up some electric engine manufacturing. We only need these for a single silo right now, so grabbing both bacteria off the line and box-feeding the shelf-stable ingredients is good enough. We will also be taking the copper plate byproduct and box-feeding that into this little gun turret maker to research those sniper turrets. We will also be forgetting to box feed ammo to the turrets protecting the cupric scrap belt every so often and getting reminded by entity destruction warnings. Anyway, Garbo grabbers need to be placed somewhat close to turrets, so the turret's firing radius overlaps with the grabber's collection radius. Then once we route out some chunk belts, we need to remake half of that ghetto science build that I deleted since we need locomotives for the new science too. And just as embarrassing is how this build has to get those locomotives into the final science biorecycler, a belt that's all of 2 tiles long. Technically, I designed this whole thing to be vertically tileable, just like the previous science builds, but realistically, we're not going to get any more than one set of intermediate inputs like turbines from the previous stage, so this one mess will have to be enough to carry us off-planet. Might help if I remembered to give red circuits a path out of the system, though. We're also going to need to keep making concrete for the frame loop, so here's a little concrete build. Now, if you were wondering how we were supposed to route the concrete and frame outputs back into the inputs when we can't belt or insert left, or even place requester chests at all, the real answer is armored trains, but my answer is dump the outputs into boxes and hand move them back into input boxes every so often. About 20 minutes later, Project Trash Dragon is complete and we can make armored rockets. That means we need to stop yeeting this science pack and start storing it for export. Now, rocket parts have a unique recipe on Rubia: red circuits, rocket fuel, and Craptonite frames. We have plenty of all those on hand, so we can just shove a bunch into a box and quickly build our— what the hell is that? Okay, I have been quite tolerant of Rubia's aesthetic choices until now, but this is probably a good time to mention a separate mod called Rubia Alt Cut, which replaces some of the egregious decisions with more palatable ones. I think that's something I'm going to have to install when megabasing here, because I do not want to look at a whole field of these things. In less stomach-churning news, we've finally finished researching our sniper turrets, and oh my god, these are so much quieter. I am upgrading everywhere immediately. And while I'm thinking about turrets, I'm getting sick of hand-feeding them. Maybe I could make some ammo off to the west and belt it everywhere. It's worth a shot. These ferric scrap and sludge patches are in a good enough place to try it out. Just pipe some sludge north, mine scrap directly into a biorecycler to make ammo, and immediately yeet the copper wire. The wind also blocks splitters facing north or south, probably to prevent cheesing in the form of splitter chains that run northwest or southwest. So this east-facing splitter will run one of its outputs south to defend the sludge patch. The other output belt needs to take these single-tile up and down turns so a right-facing inserter can actually grab ammo from it. But the belt routing becomes much less silly when we actually get it over to our main base. That manages to protect the base long enough for us to accumulate a whole rocket load's worth of science. I'm gonna be honest here, I expected the rocket liftoff sound to be replaced with an enormous fart. All that's left to do is queue up the researches for Rubia cargo drops and Maraxsis discovery, and hope our various research productivity bonuses are enough to unlock them both from one rocket's worth of science. Which they are. Well, that was Rubia. I think I've made my disagreements with some of its aesthetic choices clear enough, but they're worth working through because the actual gameplay is downright inspired. Wind as a hazard and building restriction is genius, and the result is up there with UltraCube in terms of just how radically it forces you to rethink how to build. I'm really looking forward to coming back and megabasing here. Just maybe with the alt cut installed. And with that complete, we're finally off to Maraxsis. Or we would be, but apparently Maraxsis is considered an outer planet, in that it has big asteroids around it, which means this inner planet hauler we're riding in isn't robust enough to make the journey. So here we are on an outer planet hauler that I pasted off camera. There, that's better. So, what's down here?
Depth at 4,500 feet, 4,800, 5,000, 5,000 feet!
Dear Lord, that's over 150 atmospheres of pressure.
How many atmospheres can the ship withstand?
Well, it's a spaceship, so I'd say anywhere between 0 and 1.
At last we have reached Maraxsis, whose entire surface is submerged to some degree or other. There's plenty of oceanic life here, like these mollusks scattered around the starting area that give us glass and limestone. The nearby coral has a 10-minute spoil timer before it also becomes limestone. Picking up this sandstone unlocks the hydro plant, which takes tungsten plate to make. So unlike Cerys and Rubia, on Maraxsis we actually have to ship some things in. Now, if you were wondering how we're breathing down here, the answer is, we're not. We can just hold our breath for 15 minutes before we need to encase ourselves in a diesel submarine, which I am here requesting the ingredients for. I'll also request some solar power while I'm at it. The water here is shallow enough that it still works. Mostly. I make our first diesel sub only to realize I am an idiot who forgot to also request fuel. So let's pick up a bit of nuclear fuel, plus some tungsten plate for the hydro plants and some other random intermediates for the who knows what else we'll need them for. I pick up those deliveries only to realize I am still an idiot who forgot to check what fuels the sub would actually accept. It basically only runs on rocket fuel, although interestingly you can also directly feed it entire barrels of hydrocarbons. But after a rocket fuel shipment from Vulcanus, we are finally able to move around the deep. Now, to make our first hydro plant, we'll need some saline water from an offshore pump. And if you're thinking, isn't this entire ocean technically offshore? Guess what? You're right. And somehow, by the grace of Poseidon, operating high-voltage electrical equipment underwater doesn't immediately fry everything in the vicinity, including itself. Once we use a chemical plant to make our first hydro plant, we can use the hydro plant to make our first pressure dome, which is what most other buildings like assemblers need to operate within. Crafting that unlocks... fish farming. Well, I guess it makes more sense than mining them. We reach into the hydro plant and pick up an uncommon pressure dome? Yeah, so hydro plants have a built-in 50% quality bonus. And as you'll soon see, that is at least as much curse as it is blessing. I almost forgot day-night cycles were a thing here, but unlike solar panels, we can't drop accumulators directly onto the seafloor, so we'll need to set up a pressure dome for continuous power. I know this dome seems massive, but we'll be pushing up against its limits pretty quickly. This thing in the center of the dome serves as both underwater roboport and atmospheric regulator. Atmosphere is a free gas that can be barreled and shipped in from any planet besides Maraxsis, and the regulator needs a constant supply to maintain pressure, although higher quality ones need less. Accumulators, at least, seem to work without atmosphere input. I guess they just needed stable ground or something. We have to ship in tungsten plate from Vulcanus anyway, so we might as well make our atmosphere barrels in Vulcanus's mall and kill 2 fish with 1 harpoon. Barrels are just steel, so making them on Vulcanus is free, and we can recycle void the empty barrels on Maraxsis to reclaim some of that steel. It's about here that Rubia starts getting chipped at. I guess there was a gap in our defenses somewhere. I didn't leave any radars behind, so I have no visibility into what exactly is dying. But I also didn't leave a supply mall or a bot network, so it doesn't really matter anyway. As with Cerys, Rubia is just going to slowly die in the background. Anyway, if we're going to keep the atmosphere flowing here, we'll need a cargo landing pad so Logibots can access the barrels, and then of course proper requests set up on the landing pad and the relevant hauler. After that, we should probably figure out the saltwater loop. That apparently starts by putting the ever-present saline water through a salt filter to get brackish water. Then brackish water can get split into solid salt, 2 parts hydrogen, and 1 part oxygen. I don't know what to do with the gases yet, so after turning off alert sounds because Rubia dying was annoying me, I put both the hydrogen and oxygen into tanks for the time being. Almost immediately the process deadlocks, because it turns out the salt filter isn't consumed in the first step. Instead, it's turned into a saturated salt filter that we can wash out, and that washing process produces even more brackish water. That means we'll need an inserter loop between the 2 salt filter plants, plus a requester chest for new salt filters to keep the system topped off. So, since we'll need Logibots set up anyway, we might as well start feeding atmosphere into this dome. Yes, Logibots apparently can phase through solid glass. Now, you may have noticed that the filter washing process requires regular old water, not brackish or saline water, which means we need to recombine some of this H2 and O2 to make H2O, in a loop that I dearly hope is net positive. Aside from the 95% chance to reclaim the salt filter after washing it, we also have a 2.5% chance to reclaim some of the carbon fiber that went into making the filter, so that needs a separate path out. Then, of course, we'll need an assembler inside the newly pressurized dome making new filters. Apparently, making a bunch of salt unlocked the molten salt reactor, which we really don't need right now. So anyway, what to do with this hydrogen and oxygen gas? Well, hydrogen is used in this super sealant substance, which among other things is necessary to make rocket parts here. We can also recombine hydrogen and oxygen in equal amounts to make rocket fuel locally, but only in a hydro plant, which means we'll soon need to deal with various qualities of rocket fuel. The next thing I'd like to figure out is how to get more glass for more pressure domes. Glass is made from sand, salt, and limestone. We can just move salt into the glass foundry via requester chest because I'm lazy, but sand and limestone should come in via belt. For sand, that's dead simple. Just like saline water can be extracted from anywhere here via offshore pump, sand can be mined from nearly anywhere here by just slapping down a miner, and we can then pass the sand back into the pressure dome with an underground belt pair. Limestone is nowhere near as simple because it comes primarily from coral reef spoilage, and the nearest reef patch is far enough away that belts would be prohibitive. Thankfully, subs are basically reskinned Spidertrons, so we can use the companion Spidertron Patrols mod to set up automated delivery of coral by sub. We'll start by giving this sub logistic requests for every quality of rocket fuel, so it can consume all the various qualities that the hydro plant will spit out. The Patrol mod's vehicle docks cleverly mirror the inventory of any vehicle above them, which lets inserters directly interact with that vehicle's inventory. After setting patrol points between the base and the coral patch, we set the point conditions just like we would a train schedule. Proceed when inventory is empty or full respectively. Then just set it to automatic and watch it go. As planned, the automatic sub fills up on coral and comes back. The sub we're driving can't follow the off-axis diagonal exactly, so at the same speed, we're trailing behind a bit. Once the dock moves the coral from the sub's inventory to a box, we'll use an inserter filtered to limestone to withdraw spoiled coral from that box and feed it to the glass foundry. But as one might expect from anything to do with spoilable resources, this setup wasn't nearly sophisticated enough for the actual complexity of the task. For starters, these miners are mining coral even if there's no sub here to pick it up, which means eventually some or all of this will spoil into limestone before the sub even gets here. So while I'm musing about how to deal with that, I decide to go off in search of this mod's major terrain feature: trenches. Supposedly they're discoverable by following cliffs, but after a lot of exploring and finding nothing, I reread the trench tip and see it can be found by following perpendicular to cliffs, not parallel like I was doing. Whoopsie. Then I come back to base to find the salt loop clogged on an excess of hydrogen. I decide to vent the excess with a flare stack, but the better option would have been to use the hydro plant, which has the magical ability to void any fluid. This is also about when a viewer pointed out that subs have an equipment grid, so we can add exoskeletons to our personal submarine to make it faster. I guess they're paddling really fast or something. Setting back out in our newly speedier sub, we quickly happen upon a gash in the landscape. Welcome to the trenches. There's lava here, so this is where one would get metals natively instead of just shipping them in from another planet. Mining a chimney vent unlocks tungsten-made ducts. These are also from a companion mod, this one called Fluid Must Flow. They're basically just bigger pipes, but they're necessary here because the duct-to-trench that Maraxsis added is the only way to pipe fluids back and forth from trench to surface. We'll eventually need to do that because this planet's native science pack requires these things called worm specimens, which can only be crafted at trench-level pressure and are made with worm confinement cells and fish food. The cells are easy, just steel and glass, but as you'll soon see, the fish food is significantly harder. Worms aren't the only thing we need fish food for either. We can also use modified agricultural towers to plant food in coral reefs and then harvest fish. I wonder about the purpose of this recipe that makes sulfur from nothing but lava and steam, and discover that the supersealant substance we'll eventually need for local rocket parts takes sulfur, along with heavy oil. And it is technically possible to get heavy oil here natively. After farming fish, you can burn them to get carbon, synthesize that to get coal, set up a liquefaction loop, and even use this new recipe to uncrack the resulting petroleum back into heavy oil. But, spoiler alert, we won't be doing any of that. Anyway, one thing at a time. Let's make a fishing tower and place it in some coral reef. For some reason, I get it in my head here that it would be a great idea to take the existing sub that's already harvesting coral directly and make it dual purpose to also carry fish and food. And you can do things that way, but you really shouldn't. Don't worry, I'll sort this out soon enough. In the meantime, we have other problems. We need coral to make fish food, but the coral chest has all spoiled into limestone. Thankfully, docks can both broadcast and receive circuit signals, so I set up a combinator to trigger a waypoint circuit condition if either coral or limestone is empty. But fish cannot feed on coral alone. Fish food also takes sand, jelly, plastic, and other fish. Told you this was a pain. If you're wondering, no, we don't have to import jelly nut from Gleba or anything like that to get jelly here. Instead, you, combine fish with piercing ammunition to get jelly and microplastics, the latter of which can then be smelted into the usual plastic bars. And once we have a little bit of everything we need, we quickly shove it all in a hydro plant and get out a pile of fish food of varying qualities. Fish still spoil here, so I'd like this fishing tower to only harvest fish when the sub is present to pick them up. We can do that by wiring the tower up to read the dock's contents, meaning the sub's contents, if any, and only enabling when rocket fuel exists. And while we could make piercing ammo on-site from imported raw materials, or even go to the trouble of making all the raw materials locally on the trench floor, it's a heck of a lot easier to just import the ammo directly from Novice. You know what? While I'm making things easier on myself, let's split the cargo sub duties. One sub for coral and limestone, another sub for fish and fish food. That also necessitates a second dock at the reef, so the coral sub showing up doesn't trigger fish harvesting or vice versa. And yes, Rubia is still dying. We also don't want to trigger a fish harvest when we already have plenty of fish back at base. So we'll use a combinator to monitor dock contents plus storage contents, and only send the fish sub back out when we have no fish present anywhere in the system. Remember this combinator, it will come up again. Also wouldn't hurt to ensure that the sub is actually carrying food before it heads back out. That should be everything we need to automate fish food, and this is where I start trying to clean up how we're handling or not handling quality products. I hope you've taken your headache meds because these are some doozies. We don't get quality fish by planting quality food, so we can safely request all qualities of food for the fish sub without having to worry about how to handle the resulting fish. But in doing so, we also need to explicitly set the fish food output inserter by the reef to any quality, because inserter filters default to common quality only. We also need to explicitly set the sub's rocket fuel inventory filters to any quality of rocket fuel, because cargo filters again default to common quality only. If your head doesn't hurt from all the quality juggling yet, it's about to. For some reason, the game doesn't give us the option to accept arbitrary quality when setting circuit conditions for enabling or disabling machines. So we also need a separate combinator that looks for the presence of any quality of rocket fuel. But decider combinators also don't let you accept arbitrary quality signals, so that combinator needs 5 separate monitoring conditions, one for each quality. Fixing that fish combinator I told you to remember from a couple paragraphs ago is even more special. Besides checking for any quality of fish food present in the sub, it also needs to check for presence or absence of fish in storage. And because the OR condition is always top level, this combinator needs 10 conditions. No fish plus common quality fish food, or no fish plus uncommon quality fish food, or you get the idea. To be fair, one of my stream viewers gave me a cleaner suggestion. Use a separate selector combinator to quality transfer the fish food signals to a shared quality, then monitor only that quality in the decider combinator. But I just can't shake the sense that I shouldn't have to do that, and everything should just allow a wildcard quality. At least we can take advantage of that combined quality fish food signal to only blast more fish into jelly if we're actually in need of food, to minimize needless jelly production and spoilage. Okay, now we're out of coral for fish food, and the sub is stuck here because we're clogged on too much limestone. Similar to the fish sub, I only want to send the coral sub back out to harvest if there's no coral or no limestone across both sub storage and logistic storage. That involves a miniature nightmare of filters and circuitry, but eventually I get it mostly working. We still have a pretty significant surplus of limestone though, so let's put in for some recyclers from Fulgora. If we were making metals locally, we could turn this extra limestone into calcite for the lava foundries in the trench. But for now, we're just going to void the extra limestone and keep shipping in the metals. Maybe something to change when we come back and megabase here. Speaking of the trench, it's probably time to start thinking about setting up some real production down there. I think the primary problem will be power, since solar efficiency down there is a big fat 0. But we did unlock that molten salt reactor a while back. Worm confinement technology is unlocked by placing a duct to trench, so I guess we're definitely expected to pipe some kind of fluid down there. Plan A: duct down water and put the entire molten salt reactor assembly in a pressure dome. If you didn't use Fluid Must Flow back before 2.0 was released, its claim to fame used to be higher fluid throughput back when that was a thing that mattered. Nowadays, its ducts are basically just bigger pipes with longer underground lengths. Side note, here's another quality headache. Science here is made from worm specimens, salt, and saline water. Worm specimens must be made in hydroplants, so we'll get those in varying qualities whether we want to or not. Salt can also be made in a hydroplant, so that's actually fine. It means we can make quality salt proportionally to quality worm specimens. Whenever you're dealing with guaranteed quality boosts like this, you want to make sure that everything at the same level of the crafting tree is made with the same quality bonus. The problem here is that worm specimens take fish food, which are also made in hydroplants, and since lower quality recipes can't accept higher quality ingredients, we're going to end up with a glut of quality fish food. The farming process does consume some, but almost certainly not enough. Now, had I been paying closer attention, I might have noticed that fish food can also be made inside biochambers, and there's a tropical fish to nutrient recipe, so I could have dodged this problem entirely. But since I didn't notice that, I assumed the only way around this problem was just to recycle void every above common quality fish food we got. It technically solves the problem, but it's very much a brute force solution. Anyway, once that's settled, we'll want to vent any excess oxygen to keep the salt flowing. We'll need the salt to flow to make molten salt for the fuel cells. You're strongly incentivized to make quality salt too, because each level up the quality ladder gives you more molten salt per unit solid salt, and the common quality conversion rate is just straight up bad. At least a molten salt fuel cell contains 40 gigajoules, so we won't need many. Despite the incentives, I decide to speed up molten salt production by putting speed modules in the common quality salt plant, rather than messing with quality salt. Partially that's because I don't feel like ripping this build up and making a new one, and partially that's because right now we still need a steady supply of common quality salt for common quality glass for these common quality worm confinement cells. And now that we have those confinement cells, we should set up a new sub to take cells and atmosphere barrels to the trench and bring specimens back. Spoiler alert, those atmosphere barrels were a terrible idea. Maraxsis adds a submerge stop condition to the patrol system, so we can automate subs going between the trench surface and the surface. This is the only way to move solid items back and forth between the two. I confidently stroll into this pressure dome ready to duct water into the molten salt reactor, only to discover that it's flooded. This won't work without atmosphere in the dome. Silly me, that's no problem, we'll just unbarrel some atmosphere, except that needs power. And again, solar straight up doesn't work down here. Reading the briefing, it seems that the boiler, the heating tower, and literally every type of reactor all need atmosphere to work down here. Even turbines need atmosphere, so we can't just duct down steam to get power either. I spend a very long time scratching my head and searching in vain for some magical power tech I missed. How do we unbarrel atmosphere without power? Eventually, one of my stream viewers had the epiphany. You don't. You unbarrel atmosphere at the surface where you do have power, and that's the fluid you duct down. Okay, we have atmosphere in our trench dome. Now we can get power. Just set up the molten salt reactor water loop, top off with duct water, add a fuel cell, and it still doesn't work. Apparently, the molten salt reactor requires a bit of input power to start up, meaning my plan to get power takes power. I guess it's time for plan B. Flush this water duct, send down regular steam instead, and just feed it into regular turbines. No more molten salt anything. Too much effort, shove it all into storage. Even if we ducted down the supercritical steam from the reactor, we'd either have to duct water from the oversized turbine back up, or just wastefully void it down there, and I don't want to deal with either option. Tossing some of our copious rocket fuel stockpiles in a heating tower Gleba style is just easier to deal with. For some reason, that heating tower takes a while to pass exactly 525.53 degrees. Don't know what that's about, but a minute later it figures itself out. And finally, we have power in the trench. After remembering to make the trench sub carry common quality fish food, we just add submerge and drop-off waypoints and configure conditions, and we're finally crafting worm specimens. But the celebration is short-lived because once again I forgot that this being made in a hydro plant would result in varying quality output. The most notable consequence here is that we might drop off 100 confinement cells, but get less than 100 specimens back into the sub, simply because the various quality products likely won't stack into nice even groups of 10. So I add an output storage buffer and reuse the quality transfer trick, setting the sub to leave if the number of specimens in the sub and in storage totals 100. And eventually the sub leaves, swaps cargo, and goes back. I think it's actually working. Okay, we have specimens of varying quality. Now for a bespoke salt build of varying quality, so we can make science of varying quality. Can you spot the mistake? Yep, this accidentally increased the quality of the salt filters, making them non-reusable. But that's easy enough to fix by replacing the relevant hydro plants with ordinary chemical plants. Thanks again to a quality transfer selector combinator, we'll set this build to continue working as long as the total amount of salt of all qualities in storage is less than 200. There's no getting around needing multiple different quality recipes for science. They go up quickly enough, I guess, but manually setting up 5 versions of what is effectively the same recipe is just inherently tedious and annoying. Now that we're making science, it's finally time to think about the rocket silo. Rocket parts are standard here, plus the addition of the super sealant substance that I mentioned earlier, the thing that takes sulfur and heavy oil. We do have to do a bit of research with aqua science here on Maraxsis before we can launch a rocket, so we'll set up a handful of labs in another pressure dome. Then we had a bit of a power oopsie, so let's drop some more solar and distribute some efficiency modules. By the way, did you know you can just drop individual modules straight into buildings without even opening their menu by holding the module over the building and pressing Z? I didn't until someone in my chat told me. You know something else I never noticed before? You can connect machines directly to the logistic network to enable or disable them. Yet again, still learning new things. Now, we could make concrete for the silo locally on Maraxsis, but it's so much easier to just ship silo ingredients in from Fulgora, along with heavy oil barrels for the sealant. Why bother with a coal liquefaction loop based on scorched fish when you can extract literally infinite qualities of the one oil you actually need for free from one planet over? Sulfur, however, I will make locally. It might technically be easier to ship it in, but the local recipe is dead simple, so we'll set up a new submarine just for that. The catch is that local sulfur, made from lava and steam, must also be made in a hydro plant. But we actively don't want quality here since we have no need for quality sealant or quality rocket parts. So I'll feed common quality sulfur into the vehicle dock and higher quality sulfur directly into a recycler voiding loop. We'll barely need any sealant, so one chemical plant making it and one heavy oil unbarreling assembler feeding directly into it is enough. And soon enough, while I was distracted by something else, the sulfur sub came back and dropped its cargo to start making sealant, and rocket parts with it. Now that's how to do a rocket sprite replacement right. And that was Maraxsis. This is the most popular planet mod right now, and it's not hard to see why. Aesthetically, it's just on another level, including the custom soundtrack that played during this section of the video. And it has the mechanical chops to back up its beauty. Moving fluids and passenger vehicles between paired surfaces is a recipe for some truly unique logistical challenges. I wasn't sure what I'd think about the quality aspect going in, and writing this script a couple weeks after playing it, I'm honestly still not sure. It does a much better job than the base game of forcing you to engage with the entire quality ladder and all that implies, but as it turns out, some of what that implies is that the quality user experience may be a little undercooked. I hope the devs at Woob have played through Maraxsis and that they've taken some lessons, because it feels to me like the Maraxsis dev has put more thought into how the quality mechanic actually plays than Woob themselves have. Thank you all for coming with me on this journey through the community's cosmos, and as always, my deepest thanks go out to all my patrons and YouTube members, whose incredible support is why these videos continue to get made. In this pressure dome of an existence, you all provide the atmosphere, so genuinely, thank you. If you'd like to join such fine company, or just feel like checking out the live streams or the Discord, links for all of those are in the description. Dyson Sphere megabasing will be the next automation video, but I can't wait to come back here and really put these planets and their post-game technologies through their paces. Stay safe, and I hope to see you again next time. Huh. No sign of Trump's conscience down here, either. Should have checked Rubia.